Oh, what a filthy night. Oh, absolutely steaming down. Well, hello my lovelies. It's midnight on Saturday night. And that, my loves, that was a super busy night. And I am knackered with a capital knack. Oh, dear me. And now it's time to drive home. The other night I watched a video from a few months ago because somebody had commented on it. And it was a video called The Potted History of Sheds, where I was speaking about cars that I owned. And it reminded me that I planned to carry on with that, but I never have. So I thought I'd do it tonight. So this is the next episode of A Potted History of Sheds. So I thought I'd talk about some of the cars, and I thought I'd pick a theme. And for today's theme, or tonight's theme, I thought I'd talk about some of the quicker cars that have been through my hands. But before I start, mentally have a guess what the fastest car that has been through my hands has been. Just have a little guess. I guarantee none of you will get it right.
YouTube channel's not any good, but he's a nice guy. I'm sorry, Mr. Moulton.
Sorry about that. But there we are. So, leading up to the point that I left the last video at, going into the motor trade, the quickest car I'd had up till then was probably the Citroen BX GTI, which was not really quick, although it was a bloody sight quicker than the FSO 125P that had preceded it a few cars earlier. Now, let's talk about the first car that I sold on a professional basis. And I kind of started with a bang, because it was a Ferrari Testarossa. Was it the 512 TR? Testarossa meaning redhead in Italiano. Italiano, it's spirito per il mare quando è bello. Yeah, that was the first car that I sold, and if memory serves, I sold it for, at the time, £50,000, which was a fair old chunk of change back then. I mean, we're talking in the, oh, what would it have been? The early mid-90s. Yeah, so it was a few quid. Sold it on finance. Now, being a young, fresh behind the ears whippersnapper, I was strictly not allowed to drive the Testarossa. In fact, nobody apart from the boss was allowed to drive the Testarossa. But I did. I took it out for a drive on the boss's day off. And my overriding memories of it after all this time were that it was stupidly wide, and that when driving on normal roads, you were very much aware of how wide it was and how much those fancy wing mirrors cost. So when I took it out for a drive, most of the time I was pretty much shitting myself that a wayward transit van was going to come the other way and wipe out one of these wing mirrors, and with it my budding motor trade career, no doubt. So I've got no doubt that they're reasonably quick, or they would have been reasonably quick at the time, I didn't particularly find out. It was, I gave it the beans in second gear on a straight road, and that was about it. But that was probably my first encounter with a seriously quick car. But it was by no means my last. I do remember thinking that if you gave me any reasonably competent hot hatch, then in real terms on public A roads, pretty much any hot hatch type thing was going to be quicker in real terms, A to B, than a Ferrari Testarossa. And I'm sure the same applies to other cars. I mean, what else did I drive of the more exotic nature? Well, I drove a Lamborghini Countach, or Countach, however you're supposed to pronounce it. We had one of those in, and that was a ridiculous bloody thing. I mean, for a start, I'm 6'5", so I didn't fit in it, and it was cramped and it was uncomfortable, and all of the controls were stupidly heavy, and visibility was virtually zero. The only cool thing about that car was the reversing trick that I used to employ when reversing it into the showroom. Rearward visibility in one of those things is, to all intents and purposes, zero. So, because I've got long legs, I was able to employ the trick of opening up the scissor door, sitting on the sill and operating the pedals and the steering wheel while sitting outside the car and reversing, so at least you can see where you were going. But again, that's not a car that in real terms was going to be particularly quick. Now, I had any number of Porsche 911s go through, including it started life as, I think it was a 77 911 Martini Turbo that had been turned into a track car with a comp clutch and a straight cut box, and that was the last car. No, that was the car that won the last Super Prix held around Birmingham. I think there were only two. They closed the roads off and held these Super Prix. And anyway, this bloody thing won it. Horrendous thing. You had to have about 4 grand of revs up before you could dump the clutch unless you wanted it to stall or kangaroo down the road. But let's forget about the more exotic things and let's talk about actual things that I drove on a regular basis or owned or whatever that were fairly quick. Now let's have a think. Well, in the early days I did have a Porsche. I don't like German cars, and I've only personally owned 2 Porsches. Now the second Porsche I owned I was actually very fond of, we'll come to that, and that was the ex-Top Gear Porsche 928, which was it was a hybrid car. It was it had the later interior, the S4 interior, but the earlier engine with the non-cat exhaust, and that had a few more brake horse. Eventually they bored it out a bit to get the power up of the detuned engine, but mine was the original 5-litre lump that didn't have a cat, and that was an amazing high-speed cruiser. When I owned that, I was living in, well, I still had my flat up in Worcestershire, but I was actually living in a thatched cottage in Devon with a very beautiful woman called Lisa. And I was commuting up and down the bloody M5 from Birmingham to just outside Exeter, and my God, was that 928 a good car for the motorway commute, especially in those pre-camera days, where you would quite happily and comfortably sit at 140 miles an hour, feeling absolutely secure. But anyway, that's running ahead of myself. The first Porsche I had, some people would say it wasn't a Porsche, because it was a Porsche 924, which, as most of you will know, had a Volkswagen van engine in it. Except mine wasn't any normal 924. Mine was a 924 turbo, factory code 931. Quite a rare beast. And that had, was it a 2 or a 2? I think it was a 2.5 litre turbocharged lump with a Getrag dogleg 5-speed box in it. And it was a car that I found myself to be supremely comfortable in. It was one of those cars where you could lie down in the front seat, arms straight out, legs straight out. Not many cars you can do that in when you're 6'5", but that was one of them. And I found it very well placed on the road, very confident handling. You felt very happy throwing that into a corner, and that was quite a nippy car, really was. And I was very fond of that. I remember it came with a massive history file. I mean, I absolutely nicked the car, got it for next to nothing. Well, relatively speaking, next to nothing. I can't remember how much I paid, but it was only 2 or 3 grand. And it was a car that had God knows how much spent on it. Can't remember what year it was. I remember it was a phase 2 931 turbo, so one of the later ones. And it had that oh so of the time checkered sort of chessboard interior. But that's enough of that. What else? Well, let's get on to what I think was probably, for normal people, the fastest everyday use car that you're probably likely to get into. At the time I was playing, the car I'm talking about was on the scene. There was also a 911 turbo that I was using regularly, and a Ferrari Mondial, not the silly initial base one, which was a gutless wonder, but the Quattrovalvole, which still wasn't a proper Ferrari, but at least it had enough power to pull the skin off a rice pudding. But the other car was much quicker than either of them, and I'll tell you what it was a twin turbo Supra, would have been a 94 car, and I loved that. I quite liked the exterior styling. I loved the interior styling. You've got this great big sort of jet plane dash that curved around you, and it was an automatic, and it would have made a perfectly good shopping car. You could literally have sent your mum to the shops in it. It was so easy to drive, but by Christ was it quick. Was it quick? I remember going on a date somewhere down Northampton way, and I went down the M55, and the M55 was a pretty good testing track when you wanted to see what a car was made of, because there were no horrendously savage bends, and you never ever saw a police car on there, or at least I never did. And that was the first car that I remember maxing out, except I didn't. It was electronically limited to 155, but I hit the limiter, and you know, didn't feel remotely dodgy about it. I'm buggered if I'd want to do that speed in a 911 turbo at the time, which was, you know, which regularly tried to kill you. That was the thing about 911s. They did everything they could to try and kill you. You had silly pedals that were engine in the wrong place. And, you know, I mean, so if all of that wasn't enough to kill you, then of course you'd go into a corner a little bit too enthusiastically, and your natural reaction, of course, would be to back off the power. Do that in a 911 at the time, and before you know what you're doing, you swap ends, you're heading into a tree backwards, and you're kissing your ass goodbye. So yeah, I was never all that fond of 911s, but that Supra was a bloody fantastic thing, and it really was, in real terms, for a real non-racing driver, as quick as anything. But talking about racing drivers, I've got to tell you this story. I had as a smoker for a while a Maserati Shimano twin turbo, which came out of Oman, one of the Arab states, and on the number plate it had the fastest car in Oman, and Oman is not exactly short of quick cars. If you're not familiar with a Maserati Shimano, it kind of looked like a Lancia Delta Integrale that had been on a course of steroids. It was all a bit pumped up, but it was a car that needed daily or at least regular driving, otherwise it would go out of tune. So I was using this car as a smoker, and it was a left hooker, but you know, when you're used to driving left-hand drive cars, it makes absolutely no difference. I was and remain at home in a left hooker as I am in a right. It absolutely makes no difference. And I flattered myself that, having got to know this car and got to know the foibles and got to know where I thought the limits probably were, obviously I wasn't doing anything particularly stupid, but I was pretty sure that I was driving this car at about 90% of its capability. And you know, that remaining 10% is something that you leave because you don't want to fall off the black stuff and wrap it around a tree, because it was a right few quid's worth. It would have been, oh, I don't know, it was a 91 car. When it was registered in the UK, it went on a J, and it would have been about 6 or 7 years old at the time. So yeah, a few quid's worth. The one thing about Maseratis at the time and even later, they featured clocks that looked like a woman's private parts. Excuse me. But that's a different thing. So I reckoned I was driving this car at like 90%, and I was feeling quite puckish and proud of myself. Now, I had a pal, started out as a pal of a pal, and he's still a friend to this day. He lives in the States, but we're Facebook chums. And he was a racing driver, and rather a good one. Drove in the UK and then went out to the States to do IndyCar and whatnot. And he was on a flying visit. He'd stopped off, he was living in the States at this point. He was on his way to Paris, but stopped off in the UK for an overnight and came to the pitch to see us. And we're having a chat, and he kind of said, "What are you smoking at the moment, Jason?" And I said, Maserati Shimano, this one. I said, "Have you driven one?" He said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Give me the keys, let's take it for a spin." So he jumped into this car that he'd never driven before. I jumped into the passenger seat, and not only did he not driven that car before, that exact car, he'd never driven that make and model of car before. So it's a complete strange car to him. I'm in the passenger seat, and within about 22 seconds I'm wishing I wasn't in the passenger seat. it was the first time that I had ever been genuinely terrified, and I do mean terrified, in a car. Within about 20 seconds we were hitting junction 3 of the M42. The showrooms were only a few hundred yards off that junction, which was a big old motorway island, and he took that island within half a minute of jumping into this strange car. He took that island at a speed that I was absolutely convinced that was just impossible. Utterly impossible. And I was desperately trying to see if there were any more seatbelts that I could possibly put on to possibly try and hopefully evade what I was absolutely convinced was going to be imminent death, because you can't go at that speed, but he could. It was like a 20-minute drive, and you might have seen videos of presenters or people going out around the track with a racing driver and being sick, like that chap. Who was that chap sick with? Was it Damon Hill, or I can't remember who it was. He went out with somebody and was sick as a dog. Who was it? I can't remember, but you've probably seen the clip and others similar to it, and you probably think it's all a bit contrived or made up, but I'm here to tell you that it isn't. I went on that 20-minute drive on public roads, which made it worse, because it's not an empty track. There are no runoffs, there are no... So not only are you dealing with that, but you're also dealing with other traffic. And this guy, this incredibly talented racing driver, is driving this car literally by the seat of his pants. And I was just, oh God, I can't begin to tell you how terrified I was. I really can't. And when we got back to the showrooms, and this is no exaggeration, I got out of the car and I just sat down. I had to sit down because my legs were so shaky. And let's make no bones about this, the bastard knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. I begged him to stop and he bloody wouldn't. And so when we got back and I just got out of the car on shaky legs like a bloody newborn deer, he's absolutely wetting himself laughing, absolutely hosing himself. It's oh God almighty, I'll never forget that. What an absolute bastard. You're a bastard, Wayne. I hope you watch this. I've given you a stick over this before, but God help us. I mean, there's all the different... It's one thing when you're driving yourself, when you're in control. And if you're an enthusiastic and or reasonably competent driver, then you probably make a lousy passenger. I know that I do, and I'm sure that many of you people watching this, well, the 3 of you that will watch it, I'm sure that you feel exactly the same. So when you're not driving, you're always that little bit more on edge than you would otherwise be. But when you throw everything else into the mix, that insane speed, and he is doing insane things. He's power sliding in between cars on a busy bloody motorway island. I swear to God that happened. That actually happened. He's holding a car in a power slide in between cars. There's like one car in one lane, one car in the other lane, staggered, so there's a distance between them, and he's power sliding at some insane bloody speed in between the two of them. I've never been so frightened in my life. Oh my God. But the one thing, well, no, there were two things I took from that. One was never, ever, ever under any circumstances get into a car with that fucking lunatic. And I mean that, you know, he knows his abilities. I have no doubt. He's a nice guy, a sensible guy, and he was obviously driving well within his limitations. It's just that, being a mere mortal, I didn't know what his limitations were. And that brings me on to the second point. I told you a few minutes ago that I thought I was driving at 90% of that car's capability. Was I bollocks? Was I bollocks? I was driving it at about 70%, if that. I thought that I was some raving man who had tamed this beast, and I was just a bloody muppet. Because getting in the car, sitting in that passenger seat, I realised what that car being driven at 90% was like. And I'm sure that it was at about 90%, because there's obviously no way he was going to take the car to its absolute track limits. Not on the public roads, not with him in the car, and you know, he had a child and family. He had no intention of dying that day or even putting a scratch on the car. So that just really struck home the difference between them and us. And I'm not an idiot. I'm not a hopeless driver. I've driven countless tens of thousands of miles and hours in properly quick cars, and I've driven them enthusiastically. I'm competent. I've done track driving. I know what I'm doing. So, you know, like every other man in the world, I reckon I'm an above average driver, and I'm a safe driver, and I'm a competent quick driver. But he is one of them, and they are a different, they're like aliens. Racing drivers are like bloody aliens. They're so far removed from the likes of you and me that, you know, we're not even the same breed, we're not even the same species. They have God-given slide sensing buttocks and reactions quicker than a cat. And anyway, I'm nearly home, and I did promise I would tell you what the quickest car that I've ever encountered, and it's another car that I drove quite a bit. You'll never guess what it is, but I'll tell you. It was a Lotus 7 replica built by a company called Racecore. They made two, and it had now normally those things have got something like a 2-litre Pinto engine, which is more than enough because, you know, they weigh nothing. This one had a fully ported, fully tipped Mazda turbo rotary engine in it that revved to about 29 million revs, and I'm telling you, this thing was the quickest thing that I have ever driven. And it's the car that I've frightened people in more than any other. My then girlfriend treated cars with disdain because she was so used to, fiance she was, we were living together. She was so used to driving everything quick under the sun. I took her out in that on a Sunday morning, scared the living daylights out of her. My father refused to even get in it with me. That thing was stupid. That was doing 0 to 60 in something like 2.4 seconds. It was insane, and the incredible speed was kind of exacerbated, or the sense of it was exacerbated by the fact that you're open to the elements and so low down to the ground. The only way I can describe it was, if you remember Star Trek, when they went into warp speed and the stars just suddenly came flashing towards you. That's what it was like. You set off at full rattling first, the world suddenly comes towards you, and in a fraction of a second you're looking for second, and oh, that thing was just unbelievable. And of course it handled as well. I remember going around the Maypole Island. Anybody who knows Birmingham will know the Maypole Island. And I just went round it. It was a Sunday morning. I'd gone down to Beckett's farm to get some stuff for lunch and the Sunday Times. And I just went round and round the island again and again and again, increasingly quickly, to see just how fast I'd have to go before the back end started to move. And I don't mind telling you, my courage ran out long before the grip did. I just gave up on trying to go any quicker and trying to unstick that back end. That thing was absolutely unreal. Quicker than anything else, any of the others. You name it, that would have run bloody rings around it. I've got no idea what the top end was. You wouldn't go anywhere near that, I suspect, but you know, certainly up to 100 mile an hour, I'd have backed that against certainly anything then, and pretty much anything now. Oh, anyway, I've made it home, so that's that. When will this go out? This will go out on Sunday night. So I hope you've had a fabulous weekend. Good luck for Monday morning. Have a great week ahead, and I'll catch you next time. Good night, my loves.